Welcome to the Healthcare Leadership Experience radio show with your host, Lisa Miller. Lisa is an entrepreneur, inventor, advisor, and founder of Vi Healthcare Consulting, the leading healthcare advisory and analytics firm, helping hospitals accelerate their margin improvement goals. Lisa loves to think differently and collaborates with leaders and their teams to solve challenges and to create new, innovative approaches that impact the clinical and business side of healthcare. Our show will bring you leaders and innovators within healthcare and across multiple industries. Be a part of the discussion that will give you a unique perspective, deep insights, and roadmaps to successfully help you navigate the clinical, financial, and operations of healthcare. Your show starts now.
Hello, this is Lisa Miller, and you're listening to the Healthcare Leadership Experience on Healthcare Now Radio. And I am really excited today as we have Drew Lerman, who works at Southwestern Vermont Healthcare as the Director of Finance with a long-standing career in healthcare finance, over 40 years. And I have lots of questions for Drew. And also, he has an upcoming book called It's Nobody's Money. If you missed last week's episode, it was about trends in healthcare. I'd encourage you to listen. That's episode 29. And today, this is episode 30. Again, we have Drew Lerman with us. Drew, welcome to the Healthcare Leadership Experience.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me on.
Okay, you're welcome. So I would like you to just give us a background of you, your career, hospital finance, and just a little bit of your history, because you have a really extensive, deep expertise in finance, from decision support to working with small, large health systems as VP of Finance. And it's a really interesting expertise, and you've seen a lot of changes in healthcare. So I just would love to hear a little bit about your background and your career, and just to give the audience an overview of you.
Sure. I've been in financial operations for over 40 years. I've been with 7 different facilities. I've been with small facilities. I've been with large facilities. I've been with religious facilities, ranging from 75 million to 500 million to a billion organizations. I've gotten the pleasure of working in almost every capacity that I've overseen, such as I started in accounts payable. I've been in reimbursement. I've been in payroll. I've been in did general accounting functions. I've done the financials from start to finish. When I started my career, I got to be a manager at a very early age. I was the number one in finance at the age of 26 at one facility, although it was small. So I've gotten to see a lot in finance. I've gotten to know a lot of people in finance and really been in depth into the financial operations of all the facilities I've worked for.
So that's why I was so excited to speak with you, as well as talking about your upcoming book, because you have an AP experience, which I think, gives you probably a unique perspective as a leader, healthcare leader in finance and working in decision support and all the aspects. I think because healthcare has so many different components of finance, but when you have someone that's had the job of doing those various functions, I think it really ties it all together, and you could see the connections, right? And you could see the opportunity. So I don't know what you feel about that, but I certainly see that having more connections allows you to see the patterns, put together the puzzle, of healthcare together, to see the relationship of cost to reimbursement and, invoicing to contracts. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that.
Sure. There's a lot of opportunities there. When you deal with various vendors, first of all, you have to be able to time out your payments to them. But when your cash is short, you have to work with them. And I know that at least in the accounts payable world, dialogue with the vendor is important, because if you don't let the vendor know what's going on, it actually makes the situation a lot worse. And then you start to have supply chain problems of getting supplies through the hospital. And you never want to be in that position. And I've had the opportunity to work with facilities that had cash flow challenges and tried to work with the vendors. And I found that it was very helpful to at least keep the communication going and the dialogue going. That kept the supplies, keep coming into the hospital.
You bring up a really good point, because there's so many aspects that impact supply chain. And as you said it so well, really that open communication is really critical with the vendors to be able to work with them and keep the supplies coming. And that's a really good perspective. And I think, one that will probably be, unfortunately, maybe dealing with more is next year embarks on us with inflation and just some challenges the hospitals have. But that's a really good point about communication. And vendors are probably really willing to work with hospitals that have that flexibility. Can you share your perspective on the biggest challenges hospital finance leaders face and will face in 2022?
In addition to COVID and the challenges about just even getting people hired in various areas throughout the hospital, I think that everybody has to have a plan B and a plan C, because things can go south in facilities very easily. The reimbursements are challenging because the insurance companies are throwing every obstacle in place other than pay you. And the accounts receivable becomes, very critical under COVID. And I think that working with the physicians is also very important, because I truly believe until you align the payment mechanism between the physicians and the hospitals, you're going to have a constant challenge with them. And what I've tried to do with the physicians is show them what things actually cost, especially in the operating room area. So I think that the challenges I see are just the accounts receivable, hiring, getting people through the door, and planning on living on Medicare, because most of the insurance companies are trying to pay closer to what Medicare is paying. And I think that you have to be a profitable organization, assuming that you're only going to be paid the Medicare rates.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I love the combination, that four combination approach. And one of the things that we've been working on more and talking about more is the working with physicians, particularly in the OR. And, how do you have those communications well before, there's a renegotiation or a utilization review? Like, how do you engage those physicians to really help them understand what the costs are? And I think that's what you're talking about. It's a new level of bringing those physicians in and aligning physicians well before those contract negotiations begin.
Well, I can give you an example in orthopedics, where I worked with the orthopedic department and tried to show them, because they're very, very expensive supplies that they use in their procedures. And I sat down to breakfast with the head of the orthopedic department, not here, but in a previous facility. And he looked at me and he said, what's in it for me? And I had to sit back and think about that for a second. But what I told him is that you will share in the cost savings. We will be able to put money aside for your department. So if you need to expand or you need a piece of equipment, you'll have it. And that seemed to work. They actually jumped on board with that, and I was able to standardize a lot of the supplies that they were using.
So, the way to work with physicians, not on a gain sharing basis where they're getting money, versus a way that they can put money aside for their department and have it a departmental incentive, I think is a strategy that's brilliant. And more hospitals should be looking to do that, because sometimes they're wanting, whether it's, new lights, or even they want their own special gloves that maybe it's only 50 cents more per glove. Obviously that adds up, but they've got some kind of incentive or some dollars in their own bank because they contributed to a cost savings initiative. And I think that's a brilliant strategy. We're seeing it work. Obviously it worked for you. So, it's, sometimes you don't need big, large, complicated strategies. You just things that are give and take. They've made an investment, and then, they've got some money, to share in that investment for their department. And ultimately, for the good of the hospital and for patient care. So I think it's a win-win all the way around.
Yeah, and I think eventually you're going to have to include physicians in the as accountable care organizations start to become bigger and bigger part of your revenue stream. You're going to have to consider some type of model to deal with the physicians in order for them to have teeth in the game.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And they're the biggest driver of cost or influencers. And, I think it's going to take a real thorough strategy and alignment, like you said earlier. And I love Plan B and Plan C, because I think you're going to need a Plan C too. And in what you talked about with managing to Medicare, I think that's so smart.
Well, one of the heads of the hospital association once put out a quote that said that a budget is a plan, not a promise. And I think that you have to be flexible in how you go about it during your fiscal year.
Yeah, I like that. So what do you see as the biggest opportunities hospital finance leaders face? So, that we talk a lot about challenges, and I think unfortunately we have headwinds of big challenges coming our way, but there has to be opportunities. And I'm wondering what you see as the biggest opportunities for finance leaders.
I think finance leaders have to get out of their comfort zone. I've seen a lot of brilliant finance people fail in healthcare because they don't have communication skills. They can't engage employees across the entire hospital. I've had the good fortune that I have good relationships with the clinical people, and I'm considered fair. I mean, you don't want to be called the CF no. You don't want to be called, you don't want to be turning people away all the time. You have to be able to engage people. And I've seen people that I've reported to throughout my career and other financial leaders in other organizations fail because they can't communicate. They can't engage people, and they can't motivate them into one common cause. And I think you have to have that ability in order to survive as a financial leader. You have to be able to work across the spectrum with doctors. You have to be able to work with the clinical staff. You have to be engaged. I have the good fortune here at Southwestern Vermont as my chief financial officer, who I've known since the early 90s. He can go at 50,000 feet and then jump right under the hood and do a bank reconciliation. And he's engaged with people. So, I've been very fortunate to be able to work for people like that versus people that can't communicate, and they end up, hurting the organization because they can't get their message out, they can't get them engaged, and they can't get them towards a common goal.
So once again, I love what you just said, and it's a theme that's been coming up more and more for me and for other engagements we've been working on. And it's so interesting. No, I've never heard that before, but it's true. I think that this whole aspect of finance leaders understanding that change management, or that process of engagement and communication, is so critical. I'm learning that as well, because sometimes you feel like, okay, well, this is the opportunity to save money in it, and you should know, that it's the right thing to do, and let's go do it. And, for some people, that does click. But however, I think, and again, I'm speaking from my perspective and others I've had conversations with in finance roles, we've got to learn to be better about how we communicate, how we align, how we motivate. And that's probably, a soft skill, but it's probably an absolute necessity in order to move some of these engagements along. And I've been learning that as well, Drew. I think it's really a great point about that's the opportunity for finance leaders. How do you move and align and really motivate? And it really is bringing in this change management skill set into the finance equation.
It's interesting to me. I was asked one time to talk before a cardiology group about profit and loss statements by physician, which I developed when I was at a hospital in New Jersey. And at the end of that, being a financial person, I actually showed them a film from the Cleveland Clinic called Empathy. And I did that because I want them to understand that you get into healthcare for a reason. It's not all about finance. It's about taking care of people. And the short clip on the empathy kind of sums up how I feel about everything.
That is an amazing clip. You just reminded me of that. And I'd watched that years ago. I'm going to watch it again. Thank you for sharing that. And for those listening, that empathy clip, which I may add to the show notes, is such a well done clip about the perspective of why we do what we do. And it really you get to see healthcare in the individual, feelings and eyes. So Drew, thank you for bringing that up. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Healthcare Leadership Experience radio show. I'm Lisa Miller, your host, and today I'm joined with Drew Lerman, who's a finance executive at Southwestern Vermont Healthcare. And we are now going to be talking about his new book, Nobody's Money. This show is sponsored by Vi Healthcare Consulting, the leading healthcare advisory and analytics firm helping hospitals accelerate their margin improvement goals. Vi has collaborated with healthcare leaders and their teams to accelerate their strategic initiatives and improve their financial performance by over $1 billion since 1999. So I'm going to jump because I think I want to spend more time than some other questions I had for you about your new book. So you wrote Nobody's Money. Can you please share with us why you wrote the book and who this book is for before we get into some of the details? Just like to hear the backstory about this.
Well, there's certain, I'm chronologizing my career, but what I'm trying to get the point across is that people in healthcare in the nonprofit 501c3 world don't treat money the same as if it was their own. And they make decisions that are mind-boggling that you just don't see in a normal industry. And I'll give you an example of, in my career, I've seen people put up new buildings with no business plans, no additional volume, things that would never get approved. And a lot of the things that, and a lot of the initiatives that take place in healthcare never have look backs. They never go back and see what happened. Was it what they anticipated? Is it what they thought it was going to be? Did it make the money that they thought it was going to be? And this happens time and time again. And throughout my career, I started to keep almost like a diary of these type of things because they were so frustrating to me is that you couldn't get people to get the idea of spending the money like it was their own. A lot of the waste in the healthcare that I've seen, a lot of the consultants that come in and absolutely tell you what you already know is the problem. And just because they bring in a nice PowerPoint report doesn't mean that anybody has the appetite to pull the trigger and do any of those things anyway. So a lot of the stuff is a lot of dollars are spent with no results, no returns. There's a lot of dollars that are spent that nobody goes back and takes a look at. There's the board of directors of most hospitals or the board of governors or whatever they call their board always has the same people on it. You have the insurance person, you have the bank person, and it always seems to be the same. All the voluntary boards that I've seen in my career, they don't have any teeth in the game, except for their own particular business that they happen to be in. So they may be community members, but they don't, it's not always in the best interest of the facility that a lot of these things are done, or buildings are done, or you erect something that has basically no return. Aesthetically, it might be pleasing, but it's not bringing any new business in. So, and you're also constantly, I see that consultants, they work a different way. They all have different agendas when they come into the facility. I mean, you could have a turnaround company and their agenda may be to replace all of the upper management. I've seen that before. So I've been in a number of facilities where you may be making money and you bring in these companies because you think your operating margin isn't even enough. And well, these companies have their own agenda about who they, where they want to replace and how long they want to be there. So I wrote the book because the bottom line is that you have to treat the money like it's your own in a facility. And that means every director, every department. And you have to look at things. You have to look at labor. You have to get replacement out of your vocabulary. You have to be able to do things differently. Right now, during 2022, I brought in a performance engineer because I want to help departments do things more efficiently. I want to be able for them to be working at work per unit of service, what they call WUPOs. Worked hour per unit of service. And I want them to improve on that. I don't want to have to benchmark them against other facilities because it doesn't serve any purpose. But if you benchmark against yourself and make incremental improvements, then it's going to drop right to your bottom line. So I guess, the book is really a chronicle of my frustrations in healthcare throughout the years and where I see it going. And again, I think I've alluded to that until you aligned the way physicians get paid and hospitals get paid, or you make the physicians have some teeth in the game, you're not going to be successful in the payment models that are coming up.
So, Drew, thank you so much for giving us that background. I love what you just talked about, particularly about bringing in a performance engineer and benchmarking against yourself and making incremental improvements. I think this industry has gone way over the top with like benchmarking against others. And I've often thought like, okay, well, you're benchmarking either in a silo of a GPO or a silo of whatever hospitals they have. And the benchmarking, you don't know how those numbers are being put together. And listen, we benchmark, but I understand, and I've often talked about sometimes the benchmarking, the real breakthroughs are when you really kind of look within your organization and build a case based on whether it's reimbursement or like you're talking about, even benchmarking against yourself, setting a baseline, and then making incremental improvements. I think that's how you really optimize and go well beyond benchmarks. Can I ask you what made you bring in a performance engineer and just give the listeners a little more detail on that? Because I feel like that's a great strategy. People are probably like, oh, I think I want to learn more about that.
Well, we had a benchmarking company that we utilized, and I used to put out the reports every quarter and showed them where they were in relation to other hospitals, our size, same volumes. Every department had a little different indicator, but it was a nationwide company. But I can tell somebody that they have an opportunity to reduce FTEs by 5, but I have no roadmap to get them there. So the performance engineer is going to fill that void. It's not going to cut 5 people from their department. It's going to make incremental changes to they're going to look at workflows. They're going to look at, if it's a physician office, they're going to look at the appointments, no-shows, other kind of stats. So it's going to help them get to a better point, instead of just automatically throwing full-time equivalents at a problem, or automatically replacing somebody. Maybe there's something you can do that workflow-wise that helps you. And the performance engineer gets you from point A to point B, helps you get there.
It's the solution. It's the pragmatic, real solution. It's not just putting something in a binder saying you have a gap here and now go figure it out.
Exactly.
It's a real solution, which I love. I think people can probably get their head around that solution better than taking FTE away. They can get their head around, okay, well, yeah, I would love for you to help me with my workflow. Like I realize I need help, but I could see that people would be more aligned and engaged in what you talked about earlier, motivated if they were given help with that, right? That doesn't mean just removing somebody so other people now have this bigger workload. You're actually helping them probably with their workload by giving them better processes.
Yes, just giving them a benchmark really doesn't serve any purpose, and they don't really know what to do with the data. Plus they push back, it's wrong, we're different. And the performance engineer once told me, and told one of the directors that said that yeah, you're different like everybody else. I mean, and it's the truth, because you're going to come up with the top 10 excuses of why you can't do something, other than looking at the operation differently, right, and trying to do things differently. Some individuals don't embrace change, and those are the people that are going to be left off the bus, because you have to be able to do that in order to survive in this industry.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, think differently. I'm a big proponent of thinking differently and putting solutions together that may not be the norm, but help everyone, solve the problem. And we just have to take the time sometimes to think differently. So, Drew, as we're kind of wrapping up, we probably could have you on the show again, talking more about your book and your experience. But can you just share a little bit about what the readers will learn, and what's your ultimate goal in writing a book? Just from having this conversation with you today, it seems also like you're a great teacher, right? A good mentor or coach. And I think healthcare needs a lot more mentors and coaches in the executive roles to, to kind of lead the next generation. But can you just share with me, as we kind of wrap up, what the readers will learn and what's your goal and intention, in getting this book out?
I'm hoping that readers of the book, and hopefully there will be a few, that they've changed their paradigm about how they look at their role in the organization. I tell directors all the time that I'm overhead. I'm the finance department. I'm overhead. My job is to make your job easier. So the more data, the more things I can share. I want to make finance a non-threatening term in a healthcare organization. You don't have to run when finance people call. We're there to help you do your job. We're there to give you the tools. We don't want to give you reports that just sit on a shelf. We want to be able to give you the tools that you need to manage better so that people embrace how they spend their money better. And that it's part of their job. They're accountable to that. They have to be good stewards of the funds that they are given as part of their budget. And they have to look for ways, innovative ways to reduce their costs.
I agree. I absolutely love the innovative ways to reduce costs. And I think that's what's going to be the next generation of cost reduction and optimizing and looking at how we can close some of the margin gaps. So, Drew, can you just tell us how we can get a hold of you? I know that you're on LinkedIn, Drew Lerman, because I would like to really let our audience know when your book comes out. I know that you're just wrapping it up. I would anticipate, sometime early next year, but if sooner, how can people get a hold of you? Because I can imagine you're probably going to have a lot of readers.
Well, sure. You can get a hold of me at drew.lerman, Lerman, at svhealthcare.org.
Okay, that's great. And we will include that in the show notes. We'll also include information about the book when you do finish. And Drew, thank you so much for joining us today on the Healthcare Leadership Experience. And just to remind everyone that you can also email me about the show, anything that you'd like for us to cover, and comments, please subscribe. And you can always listen to past episodes, but we appreciate everyone listening to the Healthcare Leadership Experience radio show on Healthcare Now Radio. Thank you.
Thank you for joining Lisa Miller for this episode of the Healthcare Leadership Experience radio show, sponsored by Vi Healthcare Consulting. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe so you can automatically get notified when new shows premiere weekly. Don't forget to leave us a review so more healthcare leaders like you can discover us. This show is on Healthcare Now Radio, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, Pandora, and other major podcast platforms. To reach out to Lisa personally, you can join the conversation on LinkedIn, where Lisa continues to have discussions on the business of healthcare. You can find links to Lisa's other social platforms in the show notes or at vihealthcare.com. The Healthcare Leadership Experience radio show is the Think Differently communication for healthcare leaders, and we are honored to have you tune in. Join us next week for another episode of the Healthcare Leadership Experience